Dress Up Your Pet Day. Ben, have you ever dressed up a pet?
I have never dressed up a pet. I actually currently do not have any pets. But I think I would never dress up my own pet. I would say it's mildly acceptable to dress up your pet, but only for like special occasions. Like if you're the kind of person who
Family photos, things like that.
Like if your pet is always dressed, then I think I have a problem with it. But What about you? Have you ever dressed up? You have a dog. Have you ever dressed up?
Me personally, no. My wife has gotten Halloween costumes for him. It was before we had kids. Like now it's like we dress up the kids, not the dog.
Sounds like you're trying to distance yourself from dressing.
100%. Yeah, every time we've done it, I'm like, why are we doing this?
Is there anything you want to say to your wife right now about dressing up your dog?
Don't do it. But yeah, now we put like diapers on him because he's old, and yeah, that's fun. Yeah, that's about the extent of dressing up our dog.
That's kind of depressing. I didn't know you did that.
Yeah,
I've never heard of.
Neither did I. When she said, "Put this on the dog," I said, "What?" Like,
I feel like this could digress quickly. So
yeah, very much so.
Let's transition to our Bible reading this week. Was in 2 Kings and 2 Chronicles. We finished both of those books, and then we were also in Jeremiah in the Old Testament, and then over in the New Testament, we finished the book of James and started 1 Peter, and then we had a few Psalm readings as well. So a lot going on this week, but we are excited to jump in. Let's do that next. So, Tom, how does it feel to finish Kings and Chronicles this week? I feel like it's been a long time we've been in those books.
Yeah, I can tell you how long.
Do you feel accomplished?
Not yet. We're not done yet, Ben.
Okay, sorry.
We're done with this.
Too soon.
As Brady says, you run through the finish line, not to the finish line. So
powerful.
Yeah.
So this week we did finish those readings in Kings and Chronicles, and it kind of connected together with what we read in Jeremiah as well. And so, as best as you can, just give us kind of like a quick recap of kind of what's happening like historically in Israel as these books are coming to a close.
Yeah. Shockingly, Judah is in decline. Basically, we have more of the same that's been like happening. We have this judgment that's been saying, hey, it's going to be coming. It's going to be like coming. God is going to judge the people. And then our time here today settles around Zedekiah, which is cool name if you're looking for one. Not a cool guy, but he's a king who's in charge, and that's as most kings are. And he is, hey, I know this judgment is like supposed to be coming. What can I do to get away from it? And Jeremiah tells him, hey, you're not going to be able to.
And we talked about it, right? It's not like a, hey, what can I do to get right with God,
right,
and make amends for the sins I've committed and be right with God. It's like, how can I just preserve myself? How can I preserve my power and my kingdom?
Yeah, it's avoiding the consequences of sin, not, hey, I need to repent of my sin.
Is there any way to fix this without actually doing what I need to do?
Yeah.
Jeremiah, unsurprisingly, is like, no, there is nothing you can do to get out of it.
Yep. And so we have this, and Zedekiah is kind of like, well, I just don't accept that, right? And he does kind of tries to do what he can on his own, does not go well, and they end up going into exile, or they get overrun or taken over, whatever term you'd like to use for it. It does not go well. They lose. But it really does like just center around that idea of, hey, you have a guy who says there is God's judgment, and I have a choice to either say I'm going to repent of this, and yes, I understand that God's judgment is done in a loving way, and I will just accept that, knowing He's drawing me back to Himself, even though I'm going through a hard time. I can have that, or it's, what's the easy way out? What's the way that I can preserve my kingdom? What's the way that I can kind of keep my crown on my head? What's the way that I can do this? And so you have kind of this. He's told even hey, if you surrender, right, God is going to make sure that you're dealt with in a merciful way. He's like, you will lose the city, you'll lose your kingdom, but you'll keep your life. Your people will keep their life, and the city will not be burned. And he says, well, I just can't accept that. And basically, I know it's emotional, Ben. It gets you. But, yeah, and so He's basically saying, no, I don't want that. He's saying, man, I want my kingdom more than I want to get right with God. And so he loses everything.
Yeah, and that's kind of the depressing end of those books. They do both offer like a really small ray of hope, and we see, we'll talk more about that in Jeremiah here in a second, but basically the king who's exiled, not Zedekiah, but the previous king before him, who's brought to Babylon, he's put in prison for an extended period of time, but then at the very end of both Kings and Chronicles, we see that that king is set free from prison and he's allowed to eat at the table with the king of Babylon. And so we see like this glimmer of hope, but things are not going well for the Israelites and for the kingdom of Judah as they're exiled. Then we transition over to Jeremiah, and Jeremiah's like, he's in this story that we're talking about. He's the one who's going to Zedekiah and saying like, hey, like, you need to surrender. You need to give yourself up because God's judgment is coming. And we see that, again, he's ignored. He's persecuted. He suffers greatly, but he remains faithful to God. And then we see after the exile happens that while everyone else then is hopeless because of what's going on, Jeremiah's now, his role's kind of reversed, where he's offering hope and talking about this future restoration that's coming. We see that probably most famously in Jeremiah 29, and we talk about maybe one of the most quotable verses that you see a lot of times on social media or whatever is...
Or on grandma's wall and posters.
Yeah, is Jeremiah 29:11, which, let me just read it. It says this, for I know the plans I have for you. This is the Lord's declaration. Plans for your well-being, not for your disaster, to give you a future and a hope.
Awesome verse.
Great verse.
Great news.
And, you know, a lot of people will quote that as kind of like, hey, like, God is going to, like, give me what I want and give me, like, this plan that I'm making because he wants me to prosper and do well.
Yeah.
And there is some truth to that, but it's always important to read verses in their context.
Should never do that.
Rather than just plucking one verse out of the Bible, right? And if you read even just the verse before that, verse 10, it says, this is what the Lord says, when 70 years for Babylon are complete, I will attend to you and confirm my promise concerning you to restore you to this place. And then he says, I have plans to prosper you. But what verse 10 is saying is, hey, before that prosperous time is coming, you have 70 years of exile in Babylon. Like, that's going to be hard and difficult and tumultuous, and things are not going to go as you plan. And so, yeah, God wants us to prosper, but that's not the whole picture necessarily.
Yeah.
Anything you would add?
Yeah, well, even like in the first few verses there of chapter 29, like he's telling them, hey, yeah, you're going to exile. It's going to happen. Build houses. Almost get like, settled in here. It's going to be a while. And then, hey, yeah, this is going to happen. But, hey, I have a plan for you. And I think there's the, like, thinking of my own life. If I was told, hey, you're going to have, let's say, 10 years of really hard and difficult times. That's basically, it's like punishment for sins of the past, right? But, hey, I have hope and a future for you. It's great. I'm glad there's a hope in the future, but that's a glimmer of light at the end of this tunnel, where I think like, when we look at this verse, we think like we're standing at the end of the tunnel about to like go into it. And he's saying, no, I am giving you that to know that the pain and hurt that you're about to go through, that it will end, but what is happening to you is going to be for a while, and I'm going to give you this to carry you through. But it's also, right, he's telling them to build these houses and build this life. Again, it's not for them. Some of them are going to die while in this 70-year span. Like, they will never see this that's coming. It's, hey, for the future generations of his people, there's this, he is talking to his people. He's not necessarily, this is a promise for you, like Gary the carpet guy or something, who like, you will have a prosperous future. Gary may die a week from that, but it's, hey, for his people, he has a plan for his people, and he will come through on that. Not necessarily every individual person's life is going to be perfect and great.
Yeah, and you could even say that part of God's plan to prosper them long term was their current season of adversity or suffering, and theirs was because of clear sin. But that's not even always the case in our lives. Sometimes we suffer because of sin. Sometimes we suffer just because that's a part of life. But God uses adversity and suffering in our lives for his greater purpose in our lives. And so it's just important, because the Bible's clear throughout that while God does want us to prosper, part of that prospering and that growing process oftentimes includes adversity and difficult times. And so you see that in 29:11, and then starting after that, you see really God through Jeremiah offering a lot of hope. You read in chapter 31, 15 to 20 is this really powerful passage about God's love for his people, how he has this everlasting love, how he yearns for them, how he, even though they're being punished right now, he's not abandoned them. He hasn't given up on them, and he does still have a plan to restore them. And then we even see later on, as we get into really 31, 32, and 33, God starts talking about this new covenant, or this something new that's going to happen. And so what do we kind of learn about that from those passages, and what is God talking about when he's referencing this new covenant or this new way?
Well, we've talked about covenants several times throughout, and we don't have time to go through all of them. He made one with Abraham. He made one with Moses, and it's basically God's agreement with the people of the people of Israel, and hey, this is what needs to happen for us to be right, to be with each other. And with Abraham, he went through that process. With Moses, he gives him the 10 commandments, and this is his covenant with them. But here he is pointing ahead. He's saying, not yet, but there's a new one that is coming. There's a new covenant that is different from all of these other ones. And the other ones, it was, hey, this is what God will do. This is what you must do. And again, we talked we got to be really careful, because it's not hey, there's works involved, but there is a side of those older ones that it was, hey, this is your role in this. God has a role, you have a role, and your role can change this. Yep. And so, but this new one is different, and it's pointing ahead to what Jesus will do when he finally gives himself on the cross, spills his blood, this sacrifice once for all, not the sacrificial system that they've had of, hey, you have to, it's not temporary, but it's, hey, you have to continually do this, where Jesus will be that one sacrifice for all, doing all of the work for all of us.
Yeah, I think you see pretty clearly, like you said, you have covenants with Abraham and with all the way back to even Noah, and then Moses and the law. And we've gotten to a point now where I think we can all agree that something's not working. As many chances as God gives his people, they're continuing to rebel against him and sin against him. And I think we're starting to see hey, something is going to change, because this old covenant, while it can work and it's good, God's people needed something better. And again, like you said, this is a clear foreshadow to what is going to happen through the life, death, and resurrection of Jesus, and what's going to happen even after his resurrection when he sends the Holy Spirit. And so we'll see more of that as we read through Ezekiel and some of the other prophets, and then more clearly, obviously, in the New Testament. But we see that Jeremiah starts picking up on, again, in exile. Before he was saying, everyone was saying, hey, everything's going to be fine. And he's saying, no, it's not. Yeah. Now they're in exile and everybody's hopeless. And Jeremiah's saying, hey, God still loves us. He still has a plan for us. There's this future that's still in store for us. So
which his plan too is not just, hey, you'll go back to Jerusalem. His plan is bigger than what their thought even is. It's okay, God's going to make things what they were. God's going to make things better. And so just kind of wait and see and hold on during this hard time. All right, well, we are in the New Testament as well, the book of James. We started last week with chapters 1 and 2, and 3. So I'm just going to do them one by one. But super practical book. We talked about it as like the Proverbs of the New Testament. There's a lot of just really just applicable things in here. What are some
Use of
things?
applicable, by the way.
It's my word of the day. So, and so it was very applicable here. So. But a lot of things that we can really just say, hey, the way that life like happens and what we need to do in life, we can look through here, and there's a lot of good things we can pull out. What do we see from this week's reading?
Yeah, I think in 4 and 5, we talked about it, kind of maybe one verse if we could use to hopefully summarize what we read this week would just be in chapter 4, verse 10, where it just says, humble yourselves before the Lord and he will exalt you. He starts chapter 4 by talking about these divisions and rivalries that are causing issues among fellow believers. And he says, hey, the root of that is pride. He talks about friendship with the world is enmity with God. And he talks about riches in chapter 5. All of these things where, in a lot of ways, if you boil it down, it's, hey, if we let pride creep into our hearts and into our lives, it causes us to, have divisions among each other and to argue and fight. It causes us to hold on to our possessions as our ultimate worth rather than looking to God. Even as he kind of gives instructions for how to fight against these things, he's saying, hey, submit to God, resist the devil, draw near to God, and he'll draw near to you. Humble yourselves before God, and he will exalt you. So, yeah, I think, like you said, it's kind of Proverbs of the New Testament, and it jumps around a little bit, but I think if we could try to bring it all together, that's how we might do it in these last 2 chapters.
Yeah, I think we had a reading about like Zedekiah, and like you kind of look at his life, and he's a picture of the wrong way of doing this. Like he's worried about his own things that he wants in life. He's not like humbling himself. He wants to keep his spot in his like position, and like he's not worried about the things of God and what he wants. And so he's going to seek the riches. He's not going to do what God has said. Hey, this is the way out. And so he goes for his riches. He doesn't want to like suffer. So he won't like. And he's like, hey, if you read this, then read like Zedekiah. He's the guy that is doing what you shouldn't do. And so like that like godly advice of, hey, this may not be easy, it may not be the way that you want, but trust God in this, and that he is going to lead you where you need to be, which leads us into First Peter, and kind of, First Peter, right?
Yes.
I was thinking second for a second. But yeah, about like the suffering, like there's a theme of like suffering that is going on here. Like, what do we see there?
Yeah, I mean, and again, it kind of connects when you think about what we talked about in Jeremiah, where Peter's writing to Christians kind of spread out in, different areas during his time. And we see that he's calling them to be patient in suffering, much like Jeremiah is encouraging the Israelites as they're exiled in Babylon to be patient and to trust in God and to look towards this future hope. Peter's saying, hey, I know right now that things are difficult. But he says, in chapter 1, verse 6, rejoice in this, even though now for a short time, if necessary, you suffer grief in various trials, so that the proven character of your faith, more valuable than gold, which though perishable is refined by fire, may result in praise, glory, and honor at the revelation of Jesus Christ. He's saying, hey, be patient as you go through this, knowing that this testing of your faith as you go through this difficult time is going to grow and strengthen your faith, and it's going to glorify God. Peter knew firsthand what it was like to experience persecution. Church history tells us that he was martyred himself. And so he's familiar with this, and he's telling the people, I know it's difficult, but hold on. God is still in control. He's still good, and he still has this future for us that's going to make all of this worth it.
Yeah, I think there's that, hey, these are people that know like suffering. Like we may think we know it at times, but like we don't know it the way that they knew that. And so when he's telling them to be patient in this, it's so that he can, or so that they can do what he talks about like later about living these holy lives.
Yeah.
Like if I'm not like patient in my suffering, if I'm angry or like just mad at God or like just like content with where He has me, I'm not going to be living a life that's holy that will like glorify Him. And then He even ends it with this basically, hey, follow the example of Jesus, right? And He suffered a little bit.
Yeah, he knows a little bit about suffering. Yeah. We see that in this book. Peter does it several times where he'll kind of give a command and he'll tell us like how we should live or what we should do, and then he'll quickly say like, "Hey, just like Jesus did." And yeah, we know that if there's anyone who's ever lived and walked on this earth who suffered unjustly, it was Jesus, and even in his suffering, he glorified God, and he lived a holy life for God. And so, yeah, I think you're right. Like what you said earlier, the temptation can be is when we suffer is it can cause anger, bitterness, resentment in our hearts towards God. And the result of that usually is we just stop living for Him because we're mad at Him. And Peter's saying like, hey, I understand that feeling and that
that sentiment or whatever.
Yeah, like being drawn into that, but you just to trust God and know that even in the midst of this, He's still good, He still loves you, He's still in control, and He wants to use you even in your suffering to be a witness for Him.
Yeah, I think to sum it up, for those of you that were children in the 90s or adults in the 90s, look at your bracelet and ask, what would Jesus do? Right? I mean, it's a popular thing. It was a popular thing because it was kind of that's the mindset that we have to have, because like it's easy to follow Christ well when things are perfect. But your faith is tested, right? Your faith is kind of like revealed for what it is in those times of suffering, like in those times of, hey, it's not good, but is it real in that time?
Yeah. Yeah, and all these realities, I think, are true, are these biblical, I mean, these are true things, but again, they're much easier said than done. I mean, when you're going through something, it's not easy to, just say, oh, I know God's in control. This isn't going to bother me. This isn't going to upset me. When you're suffering, when you're struggling, when you're going through a hard time, like we understand, God understands it's not easy. And that's why He's given us letters like this, and we read about suffering. We all go through, and God's telling us, hey, like it's not meaningless. It's not. I have a purpose in it, and you can trust me and know that I love you and that I'm with you and that I'm for you, even as you suffer and struggle in life.
All right, well, that wrapped our readings for this week, but we talked about pets at the beginning, Ben. I know you don't dress up your pet. You had pets, though, right?
I have had pets, but I've never...
Olive or Violet was the dog? I never could get the name right.
You know what it is.
No, I know it. I used the wrong name. It was Violet.
It was Violet.
Okay.
She was a dog.
Yeah, she was a dog.
Not a cat.
Okay, yeah. But do you ever own a cat?
I think my family had a cat when I was growing up, but I've never personally spent a single cent on a cat.
No.
Just stating facts. I mean, you can read into that what you will.
Yeah. Okay. Well, dogs and cats are a little bit polarizing a little bit, but we're going to go, in your opinion, what kind of sea creature would be the ultimate pet?
Oh, man.
Sea creature. So, I mean, we'll even open up, if you want to go streams and lakes and large bodies of water to oceans, anything in a water-dwelling creature.
It would definitely have to be a pet that you could, like, ride on in the water, which obviously reduces my options there. Dolphins aren't big enough for that. Like, I guess, like, some sharks, like... Is the understanding here that with, like, the sea creature, like, they're tame and controllable, or, like...
I don't know. I think a lot of that depends on your income level. If I'm a billionaire, like I have a swimming pool with sharks with laser beams.
I don't know if I can tame a shark though, but
with enough money you can do it. Ben.
Okay. Yeah, I don't know.
It's a pet. Like that'd be pretty cool if someone like comes over and like, oh, do you have any pets? I have a shark, and you point to your shark tank. But yeah, you can't really do anything. I feel like a dolphin's the most. Like you could actually. Not take it for a walk, take it for a swim, or it could take you for a swim. You just grab onto the fin. And
yeah. A dolphin would be pretty cool. If I had a few dolphins, that'd be pretty cool.
What one would you absolutely not want to have? Probably something from deep down in Mariana's Trench. Just one of those angler fish with a light or something. That'd be pretty cool to have. But
Yeah, I don't know.
don't know.
Just like
Yeah.
a goldfish. Like if everyone knew I had a choice to pick any sea creature and I had like a goldfish, then
yeah, I mean, you wouldn't want to underwhelm with it.
what would be your sea creature that you would select? I mean, you've had time to think about
Yeah.
that question.
I mean, like, I like the idea of a dolphin. I feel like everyone would go with a dolphin. Probably a killer whale. I mean,
Yeah, if
it's iconic.
big tank. I guess maybe your house is right on the ocean front or something.
Again, it depends on your income level. At my current income level, probably a crawdad or something like that. But at a billionaire sort of lifestyle, I mean, a killer whale, I think. And we've seen Free Willy 1, 2, 3, and I think number 4 that you can.
What are like the
swim with it.
SeaWorld animals that they do? Like manatees? Do they do like what are they do all the tricks with? I know they do them with dolphins. But
Killer whales is kind of the big one at SeaWorld, I think. Also in the film Blackfish, if you're anti-SeaWorld. But I've never been to SeaWorld either way, so. But I've seen stuff with like beluga whales and the manatees.
I feel like something like a dolphin that you could train and have some interaction with, because obviously part of having a pet is like the emotional connection. As weird as that sounds, like
I mean, unless you're a cat owner, then there's no connection.
yeah,
There's standoff.
that's true. I mean, you might have an emotional connection to your cat, but your cat does not have an emotional connection
Right.
to you.
Yeah.
'Cause
Yeah.
they're
It's a one-sided relationship, and it's
Yeah.
not healthy. Get out of
Yeah,
it.
I mean, basically, you are your cat's slave. I mean, they prance around and you clean their litter box, right?
So we tried to get away from dogs and cats, but it's so volatile that we came right back to
Circle
it.
back.
So, well, that kind of wraps up, I think, for today.
Yeah, I
It
think it's a
sums
good-
it up.
Yeah, good spot to end.
Yeah. So we do have our readings for next week. We continue on in the New Testament with some of the. We're going to finish up some of the readings that we started there.
Yeah, First Peter, then we'll also read Second Peter. Back in the Old Testament, I think this is our last week in Jeremiah too. So we'll finish Jeremiah and then read Lamentations and Obadiah.
Lamentations, really uplifting. We're going to enjoy that one. So.
So yeah, well, it was a good week. We're excited that you joined us, and we hope to see you next week on the Friday Lunchbox.